Assalamu alaikum. My name is Kelly Jarrett. I'm the Associate Director for the Islamic Studies Center here at Duke. And on behalf of the Islamic Studies Center and WRAL and the Durham Public Libraries who've all organized this event, I would like to welcome you and to say how glad we are to see all of you here. This is a crowd that we're just absolutely thrilled to see. The program for the evening is we're going to watch a video and then have some questions. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Julie Harbin, who's organized this event, and she'll go over some of the logistics with you. We are live streaming the event, so when we open it up for questions, we'll be standing over here with mics. We would like people to come and line up on the side to ask a question, because that way your question will be on the air and people will be able to hear it. And I would also ask if everyone has their cell phones, if you could turn the ringers off on your cell phones. That would also be a nice thing to do. So welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Julie. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming. Again, WRAL anchor Dave Crabtree will be moderating our discussion tonight. We have a very good panel as well. We have Duke's Muslim Chaplain Abdullah Antepli. We have a local community member, Amna Baloch. We have a UNC-Chapel Islamic Studies professor, Ernst, who will also be available to sign a couple of his books, including a new book called Islamophobia in America that's just been published. And we also have David Schanzer, the professor of the practice of public policy and director of the Triangle Center on Terrorism and Homeland Security here at Duke. So, as Kelly said, the entire event is being live streamed, and it's going to be live streamed on the Duke Islamic Studies YouTube channel as well as on WRAL's website. So you can see it either place. We would encourage this audience and our live streaming audience to tweet and to ask questions at #NCMuslims. And you can do that during the program, seeing the documentary, and also after the documentary. As Kelly might have said, probably none of you will be on camera, but if you will be asking questions, your audio will be picked up. So keep that in mind if you have questions from the audience. So with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to WRAL anchor David Crabtree, who's going to introduce the film.
Thank you, and what a privilege to be standing before you, each of you. I see many friends in this audience. It's a large audience, and how encouraging is that? Before I give you just a little background on the documentary, I want to tell you one of the reasons I wanted to be involved in this documentary is that as a person who grew up in the South, amidst a lot of racism, overt and covert, we are continued to be reminded of our heritage, and our heritage of exclusivity, oftentimes under a moniker of being inclusive. And sometimes it takes a mirror being held to our face before we can see what we may have missed. Over the years in my career, I've had the opportunity to be involved in several deep meaning projects that, above all, gave the opportunity at least to present information to help people think. Maybe there's a different way of telling the story. And every day I'm reminded of how little I know. Every day I get to learn something new, because people are constantly holding those mirrors. This documentary, Clay Johnson, Jay Jennings put this together. I just sort of showed up for it. 22 hours of interviews, months of research. It was inspired because we wanted to know what it's like to be Muslim in North Carolina. And all we could do is listen. There's no way we can know. We can listen, and we can learn. My friend Pete James, photographer, who's making sure this is streamed online tonight. Pete and I have had conversations, as I've had with others, as I've wanted to know the experience of being African American. Because through these eyes, I will never know what it's like to be a woman. Through these eyes, I will never know. I will never know what it's like to be Muslim, but I can listen. And hopefully I can learn. And together, we can share in this great common denominator known as life and realize how much we have in common and how little we don't. So for the next 22 minutes, we're going to watch this documentary, Faith, Fear, and Freedom. And afterwards, we'll introduce the panel and take your questions. And I hope you will ask whatever is on your mind and on your heart that this panel can share and present to you. And I'm just grateful to be a part of this. I'm humbled to have been asked to be here tonight. And I thank you. And my good friend Abdullah Antepli is sitting here. And he's taught me for the past year how to say the words properly. And alaikum, I can remember, but the first part of the greeting, and I'm happy. Assalamu alaikum. Alaikum. My apologies for not being better versed. Every day in class, Abdullah would come in and say, okay, you have to say this more clearly. I want to hear this. I don't care if it's 8:30 in the morning. So with that, Abdullah, thank you for your sharing after this audience and your time. And hopefully we can all learn something together tonight. Enjoy.
Islam offers people God.
We just represent our religion. We're a walking example.
It's the core of my being.
Islam is a religion between you and God.
If they wonder what Islam means, it's actually peace.
We want to live our lives in peace. We want to go to work. We want to go to school.
Muslims are part of the society now. You cannot separate them. To us, North Carolina is home.
Tahir and Fida Abulawa are a very typical North Carolina family, working, raising children, and living in the suburbs.
I mean, we have a comfortable life, beautiful house, beautiful kids. I have a career that I've never dreamt of. My husband is successful. I mean, what else could I ask for?
The Abulawas say their Islamic faith helps them make it all possible.
Islam is actually a basic way of living, if you think about it. I mean, you open the Quran and it just teaches you how to live your life every day, so you cannot really separate it. You live it every single day of your life.
The Abulawas are among an estimated 26,000 Muslims in North Carolina. That's only about 1/4% of the state's population, but a 30% increase in the number of Muslims in our state in a decade.
We have the freedom of practicing our religion more than back home. So this is one of the reasons that we are here.
The Abulawas immigrated from the Middle East in the late 1980s. They met as students at Wake Tech and got married. Fido went on to NC State.
I was just checking on you. Are you doing okay?
She now works as an MRI technician at UNC hospitals.
I wanted to get involved in healthcare. It's something about helping people and, that connection.
We steam it for 15 minutes.
Tahir went into the restaurant business. He owns the Baba Ganoush Middle Eastern Eatery at Triangle Town Center.
Thank you.
The Abalawas settled in Cary.
It's conservative. It's somewhere where we want to raise our kids.
Their children are 17-year-old Khalid, 13-year-old Noor, and 10-year-old Hamza. Hamza remembers making his first friend in his neighborhood.
We were playing hockey when I first came in, then he smacked me with the ball into my nose. And then right after that, we became friends. I don't know why.
I teach my kids to be part of the society, to interact with their neighbors, with their friends. They go to school here. They learn about the American history. We're just like anybody else.
Start right here.
Hamza and Noor attended a private K-8 Muslim school in Raleigh. Khalid goes to Holly Springs High School. He says he's one of about 16 Muslims in a school of 2,300 students.
It's tough, but then again, we do fit in. We're not that much different. We're normal students in the classroom.
Raising a kid in America in general is a challenge. And I think it's more challenge to raise a Muslim kid in America.
Everything was ahead of schedule.
Rules like not being able to date or eat pork are a challenge, and so are the questions.
Sometimes they get asked, where are you from? And they're like, we're from here. And no, really, where are you from? And, people don't get it. Like, we're from here.
Here you go.
No one really cared much about the Abalawas being Muslim until 9/11.
Oh my God, another plane has just hit another building, flew right into the middle of it.
We immediately became suspects as soon as 9/11 happened, all of us. We felt like our religion, our beliefs, our culture was questioned. Like, why do you believe that way? Why do you pray 5 times a day? Why do you act this way? And I felt like it wasn't anybody's business. I don't go ask my neighbor, why do you go to church on Sunday?
You do have people who give you the comments like terrorist and what are you doing here?
These looks, these stirs, and some comments like go home,
go back home
terrorist,
or something.
And I will stop them. I was like, you need to talk to me. Come here, meet me, talk to me, know me, get to know me before you judge me. I had nothing to do with whatever happened on September 11. Don't group me, don't label me, it's not right.
That happened to Fida soon after the attacks while shopping with her son Khalid, who was just 6 years old.
And I had to explain to him, why she told me go home, because for him, this is home.
Kwasi Muhammad Nafis claimed to have connections to Al-Qaeda.
The Abalawas and many local Muslims say every time Islamic extremists end up in the news, it fuels people's suspicions.
Hossam Smadi tried to detonate what he believed was al-Khalifi walked towards the U.S. Capitol. Nafi Adel Daoud was charged with trying to detonate what he believed.
What they see on TV is only negative about Muslims and Islam. You say a Muslim, it's like you're saying I'm terrorist. And that's the misconception. People are not taking the time to learn or educate themselves about Islam.
Next, why that may be breeding what some call Islamophobia.
There are still many people out there who don't understand who we are.
And there's, you can see, perhaps the second tower, the front tower, the top portion of which is collapsing. Good Lord.
9/11 changed life for Americans, especially Muslim Americans.
Because I'm a woman who grew up in the Middle East, but wasn't Muslim.
Janan Reed is of Libyan descent and is a Christian. She is also an Islamic studies scholar at Duke. She says before 9/11, Muslims were generally thought of as well-educated contributors to American society.
They were our doctor, they were our lawyer, they were our local favorite food chain, restaurant, whatever it was they were. You might have known they were Muslim, but even if you did, you didn't care.
The worst terrorist attack in the history of this country. Reed says 9/11 made people care and put Muslim Americans on the defensive. She says the news media's continued focus on the violence of Islamic extremists fuels anti-Muslim sentiment.
It's horrific. I mean, it is devastating. And I can tell you, all of my Muslim friends it's heartbreaking for them.
Persian philosopher Mullah Sadra.
University of North Carolina religion professor Carl Ernst shares Reed's sentiments. Ernst caused controversy in 2002 when he suggested a book containing passages from the Quran be required reading for incoming freshmen in Chapel Hill. He's working on a new book called Islamophobia in America, The Anatomy of Intolerance.
We have to deal with this as an issue of prejudice, which means judging people before you actually have an experience of them. And we have a history of anti-Semitism in this country as well as racial prejudice. We just have to acknowledge that. And anti-Islamic prejudice plays into the same mentalities and appeals to some of the same interests.
Experts say that prejudice is more prevalent in the South.
But the irony to me is that the South is also a place where people hold moral values that are in line with the majority of Muslim moral values in terms of attitudes on the family and abortion and gay rights and immigration.
In Murfreesboro, Tennessee, anti-Islamic prejudice inspired a lawsuit, vandalism, arson, and bomb threats, all designed to block construction of a mosque by Muslims who have lived in the community for years.
We feel that this message is that important.
In Gainesville, Florida, Pastor Terry Jones is famous for preaching against Islam and burning the Quran. His actions inspired violent protests in the Middle East, and he's endorsed the anti-Islamic YouTube video that inspired protests here, too. In North Carolina, the Southern Poverty Law Center has identified one anti-Islamic group called the Christian Phalange. It's based in Newton. Its website calls Islam the enemy of Western civilization and says, like it or not, the United States is a Christian country. It pictures a man named Patricio Bridges as its national director and founder. 2 phone numbers we found for Bridges were out of service. A Google profile lists his employer as Griffiths Security in Hickory. The company says he no longer works there. The Christian Phalange's only listed contact information is a Newton post office box. We found Bridges' home address in Newton and rang his doorbell, but there was no answer. Bridges' next-door neighbor in his duplex apartment told us he was home, but is a recluse who would not answer the door.
He never answers his door.
The window on Bridges' door is covered with a Confederate battle flag. A sign on it says anyone coming through the door would be killed.
The growing radicalism is actually coming from the far right since Obama has been president.
Jabril Huff is the spokesperson for the Islamic Center in his hometown of Charlotte. He converted from Christianity to Islam in 1991. He says he's faced discrimination as a Muslim, including harassment on the job.
There were people in management who told me I might be living in the wrong country.
Harassment also came in the form of a letter sent to his mosque in April. It went to other mosques in the state, too. The letter repeatedly uses the N-word to refer to Muslims with modifiers like sand and jungle.
I said this is a page right out of the Klan's playbook.
The letter states Islam is purely evil and needs to be scrubbed from the face of the earth. It accuses the Prophet Muhammad of being an evil mental case and a pedophile. It spells prophet P-R-O-F-I-T. The writer claims to be a part of a group vowing to suppress Muslims and claims to have no problem killing Muslims legally if they try to retaliate.
It was clearly an open threat.
Huff reported the letter to the police and the FBI. The letter bears the signature of a woman who claims to have no involvement. There have been no arrests in the case. We contacted the FBI and it followed its standard protocol. The Bureau wouldn't say whether it's even investigating the threat and declined to talk with us about how it even handles such cases. Huff is disappointed the FBI or police haven't arrested anyone and that he's heard no more from them. He feels like his congregation is on its own.
We're more vigilant, we're more aware of what's going on, and we are keeping our eyes and ears open.
Huff says the letters reveal the same kind of hatred blacks faced during the civil rights movement.
I think it's ignorance, it's fear, it's the fear of a changing America.
Nasik Majid agrees. He's a Raleigh native who grew up during the days of racial segregation.
And we can look back and say, how stupid, relatively to where we've progressed to today.
Majid progressed pretty far himself. After graduating from Ligon High School, he earned a bachelor's and master's degrees from North Carolina A&T. He then served his country in Vietnam as a decorated combat pilot flying B-52 bombers.
It's quite an education being shot at.
Majid became a businessman in Charlotte and served 4 terms on the Charlotte City Council.
We'll be sending the wrong signal. I always made my oath on the Quran.
That's because Majid, who was born Clarence Hayes, converted to Islam after the war.
It's the core of my being.
Islam is the second largest religion in the world next to Christianity. Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are known as Abrahamic religions because they all trace their origin back to the Hebrew Bible and its stated covenant between God and the prophet Abraham. Muslims see Jesus and Moses as forefathers to Islam and its prophet Muhammad.
Jews and Christians have not officially recognized Muhammad as a prophet. So that's where the basic difference lies.
There are a few differences in how Muslims see God and Jesus, but most of the core principles and how people should conduct their lives in all 3 religions are the same.
Muslims obviously have a code of conduct, which is very much in line with many of the other Abrahamic faiths.
What are our hearts like?
The code includes respecting other religions, doing good for others, and forbids killing others except in self-defense.
It says if you harm one, it's like you harm the whole humanity. And if you save the life of one, it's like you save the life of the whole humanity.
But the recent convictions of 7 Raleigh area Muslims for plotting terrorist attacks raises doubts among some of the non-Muslims.
The radicalization of Muslims here in our own country is a very serious threat.
Not only is this a setback for us in our work reaching out to the community beyond the Muslim community, but it's a setback for us as a community because we feel fractured.
Fractured because some local Muslims want nothing to do with the convicted men, while others question their guilt.
I truly believe in my heart that he is innocent. They set him up.
But all of them know the impact of the media attention.
They feel like they are under a microscope, which does not apply to almost any other group of people in the world. And it's tough.
Haisin Sharifi is acting as his own attorney, but the judge said he lapsed into preaching.
Haisin Sharifi made it tougher. A federal jury convicted him in a related plot to kill federal witnesses in the Raleigh terror case.
He says, I represent Allah. We are enemies, not friends, until you worship Allah alone.
Sharifi read religious verses in Arabic and said he was fighting for Allah just before a jury convicted him. Allah is the Arabic word for God.
Everyone uses rhetorical justifications to make their objectives sound more honorable.
The Ku Klux Klan did the same thing. It often cloaked itself in God and Christianity, even though it committed bombings and lynchings.
But it's nothing Christian about that.
And Muslims like Majid say there's nothing Islamic about people committing terrorism in the name of Islam.
And then all you have to have is 1 or 2 crazy people, and that's exactly how I characterize them, to ruin it for everybody else.
They don't understand what's the real meaning of Islam.
They twist everything for their own benefits, like any other extremist in any other religion or any other country.
X is negative 3.
A concept that even Fida and Tahir's 13-year-old daughter understands.
You know, people do things, and it's not because of their religion. It's because of who they are. And if they're not good people, it's not their religion that made them a bad person. It's themselves, and maybe it's what they grew up with. But it's not the religion that made them a bad person.
What I know from research is that the violent extremists are the least knowledgeable about Islam. They know the least about the religion. They don't really know much about it at all.
Reed and other experts say it's important to consider the numbers. There are an estimated 2.6 million Muslims in the U.S. Since 9/11, only 200 have been arrested in connection with terror plots.
And for the most part, a vast majority of those 200 people have been arrested before they could even get to the later stages of their plots.
I think that most Muslims who adhere to an ethical version of their understanding of Islam are horrified. In fact, we know from the statistics that the vast majority of Muslims do not approve of extremist tactics.
What kind of Muslim are we?
Many local Muslims say understanding that is the first step to understanding them.
Read about Islam. Know more about Muslims.
His name himself is Allah.
Next, how some Muslims are reaching out so others can know and understand them.
People need to know us before they judge us.
If you want to watch this documentary again, or learn more about it and Muslims in North Carolina, go to WRAL.com and type WRAL Doc in the search box.
And who is Allah? Very quickly now, okay? Allah is an Arabic word used for God.
Fiaz Fareed is speaking to a group visiting the Raleigh Islamic Center. He says he tries to teach people about Muslims and Islam almost every day.
Listing that says documentaries. If you click that, you will find this documentary, and I urge you, if you haven't seen it before, to watch that third segment, because it sort of ties all of this together about the meaningful relationships that we have. I'd like to introduce the panel, and then we'd like to hear from you. To my far left is Abdullah Antepli. He's a Muslim chaplain at Duke and Associate Director for Community and Student Outreach at the Duke Islamic Studies Center. In case you don't know this about Abdullah, when Greg Jones, who was the Dean of Duke Divinity School at the time, brought him to Durham, he was one of only 2 Muslim chaplains serving at universities in this country. The other university was Georgetown. It was a bold move by Greg Jones, and it spoke of his vision and his commitment to students in Duke University's Divinity School. And it was a decision that was not without controversy. How many years ago, Bill?
That
It was 5 years ago, believe it.
5 years ago. It's been our great gift to have you in this community, and we're glad you're here. To my immediate left is David Schanzer, the Associate Professor of the Practice for Public Policy at Duke and the Director of the Triangle Center on Terrorism and Homeland Security. On my far right, you saw Dr. Carl Ernst in the documentary. He's the William R. Keenan Distinguished Professor of Islamic Studies at Carolina and co-director of the Carolina Center for the Study of the Middle East and Muslim Civilizations. And again, he has finished the book you were writing on at the time of the documentary.
I believe we have a few copies out in the lobby.
Special price tonight, right?
Exactly.
And to my immediate right is Amna Baloch. My apologies for that. A local community member and recent Carolina graduate who was active in interfaith collaborations through Carolina's Muslim Student Association. A wonderful panel that is eager to talk with you. So before any comments from me or asking questions from the audience.
Anyone has questions?
As we're waiting for your questions, for your minds to stir, here on a day when the FBI says they have identified 2 suspects in the Boston Marathon bombings, and we have seen some still photographs, clearer, I must say, than we have often seen in videos in the past, but yet not crystal clear, and we've seen video. Abdullah, you mentioned to me earlier that your computer was inundated with dozens of emails within minutes. If you would share with us the tenor of those emails and what that represents.
Sure. Not to start with that kind of somber note, having this program and watching this documentary again cannot be more timely. As millions of Americans, but especially many Muslims, since the despicable event took place in Boston, which I hope many of us have been keeping everybody involved, especially the victims, in our thoughts and prayers, again, turn the projectors and the spotlight on Muslims again. Every Muslim has been praying that no Muslim involved in this, but especially after a couple of hours ago, when these videos and pictures have been released, I've been receiving emails basically based on the appearance of these 2 men. People are already convinced that they are Muslims and already unleashing their accumulated anger and frustration, saying, basically, we knew it. It was you evil people and your evil religion, and we will know how to deal with it. I don't know what else that it can say. Like those emails and its message already speaking in volumes how in the last 11, 12 years the irresponsible treatment of irresponsible coverage of Islam as a religion and Muslims as people have taken roots in our society. And as Carl Ernst was saying beautifully, we have had these kind of similar problems and challenges in our society with anti-Semitism, with racism, with homophobia. Again, the same evil is showing its destructive forces in a different form and shape, that the similar mechanisms should start working on treating and healing our society from the message of hate.
Dr. Ernst, is it plausible to think that we as a society in this country and other countries will ever get beyond this, truly beyond it?
Well, that's a tough question. I think the figures are kind of clear if you look at the incidence of hate crimes in this country, that minorities continue to be targeted by irrational hatred, and this is a deep well of bitterness that seems to be very difficult for us to address. Now, it's publicly not acceptable. People generally are not willing to come out in very overt ways to acknowledge this, but it's clear that racial prejudice against blacks, anti-Semitism directed against Jews, and other forms of prejudice are still extremely strong. And this is joining this roster.
I don't think you can blame it necessarily on economic causes or anything like this. It's an enormous educational challenge. And I think it's going to require the resources of not only the university community, but journalism together. And I think tonight is a great example of that, to try to bring people into consciousness of what is actually going on with this type of negativity and prejudice.
You know, whenever we have a story that is on our website regarding immigration, regarding unemployment, regarding oftentimes in the Muslim community, the vitriol that hits the comment section of the website is astonishing. Not only in its depth of fear / hatred / lack of knowledge and education, but also in its number. I need to find a better word to use, but we will say this in the newsroom. The comments are exploding because there are so many that come so quickly. Chaplain Antepli spoke to that. That probably doesn't surprise you, Miss. Would you like to address that?
Sure. Well, when I was a student at Carolina, I actually did a piece on American Muslims, and basically it was titled "Where American Muslims Went Wrong," kind of critiquing our own community within America, and it basically did explode with comments. And I was wondering who actually went on these websites. Like, it was just, a regular college, publication, and as soon as it was published, it was, tons and dozens of comments. It actually had to be removed with a lot of them. Were, again, very just spewing kind of vitriol and stuff. So, but I was kind of disappointed because there were positive comments on them, but yeah, they were just kind of a couple spattered among many negative ones. So, yeah.
Question? Yes, please.
I'm interested to hear about the experiences in the universities, as some of you have direct experience there, and is what I like to think, which is that the universities are somewhat of a bastion of cultural understanding, something that you find true, laughable, or someplace in between?
What a great question. I think everybody on this panel, other than me, is qualified to answer that. So, Dylan, why don't we start with you and we'll just come right down.
I work on this beautiful Gothic land, which is within its boundaries of its campus. I am proud to say has been exemplifying and modeling many social challenges that the society has been struggling with. And Islam, understanding Islam as a religion and accepting Muslims as people, in that regard, this campus has been admirably several steps ahead in the conversation. Not only there's not even a sign of any kind of racial, religious discrimination, hate, there's enormous amount of support, hiring a full-time Muslim chaplain, having a standing building for Center for Muslim Life, and we have 600 plus Muslim Blue Devils on this campus. I am proud to say they are proudly standing on their own feet as Muslim as well. But at the same time, the problem that we are facing is it's just in the air. It is just in the air. It doesn't mean that those 600 Muslim Blue Devils are still not carrying tons of weight in different levels for being Muslim and feeling somewhat judged and limited because of who they are, not because of what they have done. They have done nothing wrong. They made it to Duke, for God's sake, the best university in the universe as far as I'm concerned. But because of why they are, because of how they look, because of how their name appears, and there is still, I mean, to tell you how bad the problem has been, with no exaggeration, even on this liberal, progressive, inclusive campus, there's always this subtle needling of the question that the Fadia was saying, like, where are you from? Basically quick associations. How many times people getting to know my name and who I am? It's really interesting. Sometimes within a minute or 10 days or 2 days, they somehow have to feel the urge to say, oh, I had a nephew in New York on 9/11. Or giving some sort of a signal that I'm somehow foreign, somehow my presence needs to be questioned, consciously or unconsciously. But there are some colleges, the situation is a lot worse. There are some university colleges. I don't know, what was it like at North Carolina? Amna?
Okay, I'll go first. So being a student at North Carolina was actually very, I think I agree somewhat with what the questioner was asking. Basically, universities are often a couple steps ahead of kind of general opinion. So I never really, I think I felt more kind of slight insidious effects of it, but never overt. I think there was one incident when I actually didn't show up to class because I was very ill, and my teacher actually emailed me and said, I think you didn't show up to class today because you were going to discuss the veil. Basically, I think there was also like just assumption that I couldn't deal with my own bias in college. So there was always kind of just a higher level, kind of more insidious kind of, are you examining yourself? But I've never really experienced it overtly on the campus at all. I think, university campuses kind of have that tradition of being, are we not there yet? Are we not, in a post-racial society? Or are we not in a post-prejudicial society towards Muslims either? Unfortunately, we're not. But yeah, I think UNC is kind of an idyllic area as well. It's kind of a little bit disconnected from the community at large in terms of its political kind of norms and everything there. So it was just a different experience.
May I ask how you responded to your professor?
I just explained that I was ill, and I actually don't, in that I don't avoid kind of questions about that, and I actually kind of embrace them, and I really enjoy talking about that. So yeah, and I later left the class. But, yeah.
Take your chance.
Well, it's been a hard week for everybody, and I've been trying to think about what I wanted to say to this audience. And first of all, maybe I'm interested in having this conversation with Carl. Really, is that I never use the term Islamophobia because I feel like that means a fear of Islam, and I think people are afraid of things they don't understand. And I think it's true that a lot of Americans are afraid of Islam. And for them, Islam is a lot of different things. They know it's maybe their neighbor down the street, but it's a lot of things they see that they don't like abroad, whether it's Osama bin Laden, or whether it's Iran, or whether it's terrorism in the Middle East. And people are fearful. And maybe it's okay to be a little bit afraid of something you don't understand or things you see that are far away. So I really liked on the video, Carl, when you talked about anti-Islamic prejudice, because that's not okay, and that's bigotry, plain and simple. And I think we should call it that because that's what it is. The second thing I guess I wanted to say was I'm not going to discount at all any of the things Abdullah said, and I'm not Muslim, so I don't feel that. I certainly see that when I write something about Islam, I certainly get the comments in my mailbox, so I know all about it firsthand. But Muslims rightly make the point that those people, those terrorists, they don't represent us. They're just they're not true Muslims. They don't believe in the same things we do. We're not responsible for them. Let's not forget that the vast majority of American society, I think, is very tolerant and inclusive and celebrates our diversity. And the loudmouths, the idiots who say things and do things are not representative of the broader American community, and I just don't think we should forget that either. My favorite quote from Martin Luther King is that the arc of the universe is long, but it ends in justice. Immigrants, racial minorities, religious minorities have faced a lot of discrimination and continue to, but ultimately things have improved in certain areas, and We're a society that has a lot of flaws, but we have a lot of good about us too. We shouldn't forget about that.
You know, trying to remember, either 18 or 19 years ago today, an American named Timothy McVeigh parked a Ryder van in front of the federal office building in Oklahoma City. And we as Americans could look at this once we knew who was responsible, and his co-conspirator, I think, was Terry Nichols. And it was easy for us to say, my gosh, this is fringe, these people were insane on what they're doing, and distance ourselves. But as Americans, we were not offended, or as Christians, we were not offended in that sense, the way that we see the Muslim community attacked, I think, needlessly.
You're absolutely right, David. And I think it's also important to point out that immediately after that Oklahoma City bombing, there were rumors circulating that it was a Middle Eastern plot.
Former congressman within an hour.
So
down that path.
We see that that's basically what this phobia or prejudice is about, is to have unreasoned suspicions placed which are contrary to fact. And you may recall that we had an incident on the campus at Chapel Hill some years ago where a man of Iranian background drove a van into a crowd of students right in the middle of campus and injured people and was spouting a lot of extremist nonsense. And one thing I want to say is that was really important was that UNC students really came together and recognized that this was an unbalanced individual who's not representative. And there were candlelight vigils being held by people on campus, and I thought it was a very important community demonstration of trust and confidence rather than that kind of suspicion. One of the real problems we're facing is this is not simply a generalized kind of sentiment that simply circulates on its own, but there are also extremely well-organized groups that are fomenting this with a lot of money and who are placing advertisements and running big websites and encouraging this in a political framework. And frankly, this is also unfortunately appearing in disturbing ways in police and military environments. And I think a lot of people are very worried about that. So on the one hand, we do have, important places where community can come together and get us beyond that kind of suspicion, but unfortunately there are people who are trying to advance that very suspicion.
Even within the police and military, though, and I do a lot of work with first responders, and we had 2 FBI agents, counterterrorism officials on our campus this year, and it's amazing, some of the most progressive people on these issues are people who spent, who've done 4 tours in Afghanistan and really understand the problems there, and Abdullah has worked with our troops. I mean, that's been eye-opening to me about how they really understand how we need to address these problems and at a much deeper level. And I was just, we're studying, doing a study on policing tactics and how to deal with violent extremism from a policing view, and we were just on the phone with a number of people from different police chiefs from Las Vegas and Minneapolis, and they were talking about their community outreach efforts and what they're doing to work with the youth and gain trust between the police and the Muslim community for a variety of reasons, but hopefully also to try to solve off any kind of incident that might occur. So again, there are big problems, and Carl mentioned a couple, and I agree that we have seen disturbing instances, but you'd be amazed at some of the best people as well you'll find in those same institutions.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening. I have 2 questions for Mr. Crabtree and Mr. Schanzer. First from Mr. Crabtree. This is related, of course, to media. I think the media plays a big role in Islamophobia and bigotry. Because the fact that they incite is anti-Islamic sentiments, you know. And I agree with Mr. Schanzer that this is a very tolerant society. I think very tolerant. I think there are a few radical elements, maybe right-wing or whatever you want to call them, that is, you know, causes so many problems, or it's hate speech, or. But I think the media plays a big role. And I'll give you an example. After the Boston Marathon unfortunate incident bombing, you know, John King, for example, from CNN, who is a very renowned journalist, you know, used the word fight and slip or not, you know, dark-skinned people or dark people, something like that. And there were posts on New York Post and New York Daily, you know, the Muslims, the pictures. So the point I'm trying to make is that what do you think media can do to tone down the tone or change the language, which I think can help a lot overall across the board? Because, you know, I think that a lot of people that are lacking in knowledge about Islam and the heritage and the custom, you know, and the history, they're not aware. They only see what you say or what is said on the TV, regardless of whatever media outlet it is. And it reaches a lot of people. So I think I'd like to know what you think about it and what can be done, in your opinion, in your expertise. The second question I have for Mr. Schanzer is that I do agree with you that this is a very tolerant society. But I also feel that, I think, again, with all the think tanks and institutes, I think the word using American Muslim terrorism, I think that needs to change. Because entirety, terrorism is terrorism regardless. It doesn't have ethnicity, it doesn't have religion. Anybody who's religious, especially any religion, you know, or following Abrahamic faith, of course, will not do such a heinous act. So I think that a lot of Muslims feel very uncomfortable and that the word Islam or Muslim American terrorism is used, because as history knows that, you know, the Oklahoma City bombing or the '96 Olympics bombing, they were not Muslims. But of course, the language was not the same language was used. So I'd like to know what you think can be done, or you think I think it'll be helpful. And we're talking about the fear, you know, and the faith and the freedom. I think change in the wording can also be really, you know, bring down the anti-Islamic sentiments and the fear among the general public. Thank you for your time, I appreciate it.
Thanks for your question. I'm not real popular amongst my peers in the industry. Not necessarily those I work with at Capital Broadcasting, but this is something I talk about a lot. We're up against two very difficult pillars. One is context, and the other is education. We can give reason after reason why we rush, and none of them are justified, unless you're on the business side of our business. So when we rush into a story with a lack of context and a lack of understanding, we can very easily do damage that is unintended. There are unintended consequences to doing that. So those of us who try to pay attention to that and don't always make the mark, but try to, feel like sometimes we're pushing a boulder uphill. But you keep pushing. The second side of it is education. It's hard to admit as adults we don't know something, versus being open to realizing how little we know. And the fact that we can learn something new every day by paying attention. For some reason, it seems in my business in particular, if you don't know something, you're somehow less. I think just the opposite is true. I'm sure John King did not intend to, while I can't speak for him, I don't think he intended to offend. He wasn't thinking, but it came from somewhere in his own psyche that pops out. Those who know me know that I struggle with this deeply and lose sleep over it and become very frustrated over our lack of context, our lack of understanding. So much so that even my good friend Abdullah Antepli has warned me not to overcompensate for that by missing the point of what a story actually is. So it is something that you just have to continue to try to educate not only those with whom you work, but also, as I mentioned earlier, looking in that mirror and saying, what else is there for me to learn? Now, having said all of that is this long preamble, I ask you, and I ask others, whether it's an issue of this, I ask it of politicians and elected officials, I ask it of school teachers, I ask it of plumbers, I ask it of anybody in the world, no matter what they're doing, to hold our feet to the fire when we miss the point of the story. Because we will. And while the damage may have already been done, and we can't get the toothpaste back into the tube once we've pushed it out, maybe the next time our sensitivity factor is higher. Maybe the next time our contextual writing is better. And maybe next time we get the story right that we missed before. It's no excuse, but it can, I think, help better define why we are where we are. And like it or not, I mean, we are in a country of nationalists where the American flag and USA become capes of honor, become shouts at the Democratic National Convention this summer. It exists. It plays in, you know, when we absorb information, we either absorb it very deeply because something has unlocked our heart and our mind to allow us to, or it sort of bounces off or just gets in a little bit. But it stays there. It goes on a hard drive, and something will force it to come back out. Your question, hopefully, will force that to come back out with me the next time we have a story, very quickly as we did this week, when shortly after the marathon bombings, there was a story of a Saudi national in the hospital, possibly being questioned by police, that we find out later was tackled by bystanders as he tried to run away with shrapnel in his leg. But he was tackled because of how he looked. And someone thought this person maybe did this. We didn't examine that and talk about that. We were too busy rushing to find out what the police knew, what the FBI knew, what they were doing for the investigation, without saying, wait a minute, what happened over here? And to have asked the question, what does that say about us? Those are the things we have to continue to ask. I may not see the end result in my lifetime in this business, that we've made a lot of progress, but we have to continue to question it and acknowledge it. And you have to continue to remind me.
Well, I think this is as good a time as any also to thank WRAL for creating this documentary, and for David for coming to this event, and because it is educational. I hesitate to guess WRAL didn't make a lot of money on the documentary. They put a lot of effort. It's a beautiful piece of work, and it's a real contribution to our community and to education. So thank you for that, David. I want to make one quick comment on what Dave was talking about in the events of this week. I think what we're seeing, a little bit of it, is some of the fraying in journalism, a lot of economic pressure on journalism, and this is one of the first crises of the Twitter world. And it's they're not only competing against the other TV stations, but there's a whole universe that is responding to things in 140 characters, and some of it could be right, but most of it is wrong. And, they get somebody says, well, somebody is Twittering so-and-so. And that all of a sudden, that somebody Twittered it becomes news. And how do you deal with that? And how do you deal with it really quickly? And, I think we're, journalism showing some fraying because, you know, they just don't have the time to, they get one source. Somebody says, we have someone in custody. Well, somebody went on the air with that one source. That one source was wrong. In years, decades past, they could have had the time to check for a second source and a third source and make sure it was right. They didn't have that. So I have a lot of sympathy for the people in the media. Doesn't excuse them for being wrong or for being biased in any way, but it's a tough job. On my point, the question, until 10 seconds from now, the words Islamic terrorism never uttered from my lips because I believe terrorism is un-Islamic. And it's never, those two words have never appeared in anything that I've written. Now, we have discussed terrorism by Muslim Americans because there are some Muslim Americans who have engaged in terrorism, and that is unfortunate. Every time I speak about it, I place that in context. The small numbers compared to both the numbers of Muslims and the other kinds of violence that we see in society. We have about 14,000 to 15,000 murders in the United States, and since 9/11, there have been 17 people killed in incidences by Muslim Americans that are some sort of terrorist violence. So I always place that in that kind of context. 1.7 people per year compared to 14,000 murders. So if we had that much attention to every murder as we do to these kind of incidents, there wouldn't be enough time on David Show to do much of anything else. So the question about lexicon is one that I and others have been struggling with. How do you talk about this? How do you talk about this in public? So I'm using the term Al-Qaeda-inspired terrorism to refer to what you refer to as, didn't want to say Islamic terrorism or terrorism by Muslim Americans. That's the thing I find the easiest to talk about, and that's what I've been using, I think, the last 3 or 4 years.
For a long time, I've been impressed with what can happen between people who don't know each other very well when they break bread together. About 4 years ago, I met Abdullah at a restaurant not far from here. I have a very small proposal to make, mainly to the Muslim community. I am wondering, maybe this is something that would please just me, but I suspect not. I'm wondering whether during the month of Ramadan, Muslim families might consider inviting into their homes in the evening, when the party starts, people who would like to know more about Islam and about them, and who would like to share themselves with them. Maybe it's just something that I would favor, but I suspect there would be many non-Muslims who would be very grateful for an invitation, especially during that time, during Ramadan, to enter a Muslim home and be a part for just one evening of that family breaking bread together. Is that something that we might try to do together?
Good to see you, my friend. Wonderful to see you, John. I totally agree. I think that's a beautiful idea. Ramadan is a special month for Muslims, especially it's coming out in the summer. It'll start on July 9th. So do you have your calendar?
I do.
Yeah, July 9th or 10th. I'm expecting you and your family to my house, inshallah. And let's schedule the rest of it. It's important, but it cannot just be Ramadan. It's important that we have to, there are members of the organized Muslim communities here. They have been, every mosque has iftars and inviting hundreds, if not thousands of people during the month of Ramadan. But there is something just not working. For the last 11 days, this and many wonderful other outreach activities have been taking place, but somehow, after 11, 12 years, people still coming back and saying, where are the moderate Muslims? We don't hear them. We are still have these concerns and etc. I think in addition to these noble and meaningful and wonderful events and suggestions that you have been making, somehow both Muslim and non-Muslim community, without dismissing and discounting people's legitimate fears. Because some of these fears, a significant part of those is innocent. Like, if I was a non-Muslim, being in the United States as an average American after 9/11, and all I hear about Islam and Muslim is just horrible things, I would have the similar views as well. I think we will have to understand that a significant part of this is innocent, and through education and exposure, it could overcome so easily. But as Karl Ernst said, a small part of it is evil and intentional. It's serving for a particular purpose. There's an industry, millions of dollars of funded, very well funded industry, trying to promote this culture of fear and hate. That part will not disappear by breaking meal or coming together, etc. That requires a village attitude of collectively combating, fighting against these people, as we did in the example of anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, and other similar organizations. But yes, I think this is a very important invitation for Muslims and non-Muslims. Not only we will open our hearts, we will open our hearts and minds as well. I think David wants to add something.
My view is, I think that's a great suggestion, but, my view to Muslim Americans, and I'm not Muslim, but I think, we thought a lot about, okay, how do we try to deal with this problem? Is get out there, get out, talk to people, be in the media, explain things. I think in the face of discrimination and in the face of horrible things, it's just easy to withdraw, right? And stay with people who you know and understand and you feel comfortable with. And I think that's just not the answer. I think it's engagement, be out in the community, go to uncomfortable situations, explain to people, tell them what you think, and just be visible and be out there. And that's the way to do it. I'm sure Carl's the expert on it. No?
I'd just like to throw in one more thing. I do think that the term Islamophobia is useful, even though you may have different definitions of it. But it seems to me it's not really about religion. It's about citizenship. It's about who gets to count as an American. And in times of crisis, there's a history in this country of minorities being singled out for suspicion. This goes way back, against the Irish and Catholics in the 19th century, and there was, violence against them, etc. And these minorities are called upon to be model minorities. They're under suspicion. There's all kinds of pressures that are being put upon them. But this is a national debate about identity. And that's where a lot of the focus needs to lie.
I have a question and a brief comment that leads up to the question. My question is, where are the Christian churches, conservative, evangelical, mainline, liberal, in all of this? The reason I ask that is because I'm a liberal Protestant campus minister at Duke, colleague and admirer of Antepli, Imam, the Blue Devil Imam. And for the last number of years, I've been working with interfaith dialogue programs at Duke, deeply committed to this. My sister is a Muslim, I should say that. So I have another reason for wanting to do this. This semester, we just concluded a credit course on interfaith dialogue taught by 2 Muslim Duke students, women, who have taught this course, and I've been the advisor and the gopher and the resourcer. They're my boss, but I support the course and help get it organized. And we've dealt with stereotypes of all the religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, stereotypes. Small educational effort. We've talked about education tonight. Duke is a luxurious place. We have the luxury of being at Duke, which is you can do this kind of stuff. Lead up to my question. Where are the North Carolina Christian churches? Why aren't there more Christian leaders standing up, combating stereotypes, combating prejudice. Why? I know there have been some efforts in this regard. The North Carolina Conference of Churches. But every time there's something going on, why isn't there more organized Christian voices saying, stop it? It's just a question. Maybe you have some answer to this, some insight into this that I don't have.
There is no one in the panel. Oh, we have a deacon. He can talk about Christian community. But thank you for the question, Mark, because the previous question and answer sort of implies that somehow the solution is if Muslims can put their acts together, and if the responsibility relies on the shoulders of Muslim Americans to somehow educate 350 million people. The issue is so big, and it went on for the last 12 years so out of control, that I think the responsibility relies on every one of us, every single one of us, religious, not religious, that we have to, as we did in the past with similar challenges, we will have to put our acts together and pay attention to our prophetic voices and highlight the experience of those prophetic, religious, civic, political leaders, and combat this issue. I go to churches more than many Christians that I know. And if that, like, you cannot be saved except Jesus, I think I'll be saved, even in backgrounds. And it makes a difference, visiting those churches, being in the presence of worshipers and engaging with Christian and Jewish communities, or in their houses of worship. That also is a huge educational opportunity. I hope many more houses of worship will welcome those rich encounters.
I think we're making some progress. I will say this. We in the Christian community, and I can only speak for myself and what I've seen, often speak of inclusivity. I talked about this earlier. And our inclusivity goes just so far. I mean, maybe our arms are out this wide, but they stop. And we will be inclusive as long as we have some common ground there somewhere, instead of being truly inclusive. Part of it goes to fear. Part of it goes to fear of what if I'm wrong? What if in my beliefs I've hung on to these things that have allowed me to still be discriminatory, even though I really didn't thought I was, but that little voice tells me I am, and I let go of that, then everything I've held on to forever could be wrong, could be different. I think whether it's the Catholic diocese opening up as they have to immigrants in a way no other group has. Whether it's even some of the fundamental Christian churches at least beginning to have people come in and speak to them about the issues. We're making progress. I think the progress is exceedingly and disgustingly slow. And part of it, again, it goes back to the question we had about media. It takes someone else to point out, where are you guys? You say love one another. We had a beautiful gospel reading today at the convocation, this past Sunday, of Jesus saying, feed my sheep. Had to say it 3 times to Peter, who he selected to build the church. Feed my sheep doesn't just mean feed my sheep, it means feed my sheep. Feeding that goes to everyone. So hopefully we're making progress. It's tough to get people to stand up in a pulpit and say what needs to be said. You know, I'm a non-stipendiary person as a deacon in the Episcopal Church. I get in trouble because I don't have to worry about keeping the lights on. Or I don't have to worry about making sure the money continues to come in to pay staff and the practical things that churches have to do. But as I said earlier, you have to ask the questions. You have to call people into accountability and saying, as you did, where are you? Are you just going to turn your back? Abdullah telling me years ago of him trying to visit local churches. and was not exactly welcomed with open arms. Yeah, so I digress, but I have to tell this story. First day I was in class, he and Ellen Davis taught a marvelous class at the Divinity School a couple of years ago called Listening Together. They're teaching it again, where they study Old Testament, New Testament, and Quran. And we laid these side by side. It was an amazing experience. The very first day of class, he said, "You know what I don't understand about you Christians," and I love this intensity, is that you don't know what you believe in. You can't tell me what you believe in. As a Muslim, I can tell you exactly what I believe in. And he was on fire with this. I never forgot that. I hope I never forget that, because you helped me be able to state what I believe. If we can't state it to each other, how in the world can we open the doors to other people? So, good question there. We're making progress.
We are making progress.
It's
also,
slow.
I have a wonderful anecdote to share. When I first arrived to Duke, as you know, Duke University School is a Methodist. And one of the donors, it's significant, she basically wrote, she printed out my arrival story and wrote Wellesley, the founder of the Methodist Church. She wrote, "Wellesley's bones must be spinning in his grave." And then the response she received from the Divinity School was, "Yes, I'm sure he must be joyous. His bones must be spinning in his grave out of joy." And of course, which she didn't mean. I heard from this lady a couple of weeks ago, and with an apology, and with a reconnection, an invitation. She and I will be meeting, inshallah, over the summer and having a conversation. She's revisiting her emotions and her decisions of my arrival to the campus. I think that's a tremendous amount of progress. We are making progress.
I think the question should also be, where are the Jews? I've never been more ashamed to be Jewish than when I hear some of the things that the groups that Carl spoke about, who fund this vitriol, a lot of them do come from Jewish sources. And, it took Fareed Zakaria to denounce the Anti-Defamation League for the bigoted things that they were saying about the Islamic Center near 9/11, the Ground Zero, to shame the Jews into looking at ourselves. We can debate Israel-Palestine, forever, and let's try to deal with that as an Israel-Palestine issue. But unfortunately, I think that has leaked into Jewish and Muslim problem. And I guess the first thing to deal with the problem is acknowledge you have one. And there's loads of great, progressive, socially, tolerant, wonderful Jews. And my rabbi, Rabbi Friedman, and Abdullah, are good friends here shaking your hand. Everybody likes Rabbi Friedman. So I'm sure, that's not who I'm talking about, because there's, and it's not a majority of the Jewish community, but it is a chunk of it, and we have to recognize that.
I have a question for David Crabtree, but before I ask my question, I'd like to say that I want to offer an olive branch to all of my Muslim brothers and sisters who are here. It's not just looking different that causes people to ask questions like, "Where are you from?" Almost anywhere I go, people ask me where I'm from, and it's because of my southern accent. So anything that identifies you as different is going to be something that provokes interest or encourages interest, and I would say that there's a psychological element in the question of where are you from. It may actually be an attempt to establish some commonality somewhere, to begin understanding. And I think we need to pay more attention to the psychology of what's going on, as well as the politics and all of that. But my question for David is, going back to a question that was raised earlier about the role of the media in stereotyping, very quickly running to form conclusions. My question would be, is it too late to correct? Is it too late, or can there be stories about what we're talking about tonight that correct it?
Love the question. First, it's never too late. I think this documentary that we saw 2/3 of, anyway, tonight, it is a step in that direction of saying, you know, this is something we need to look at. We need to take a look at. So no, it's not too late. It's having dialogue like this. You know, how I wish I used to wish they would have dialogue like this, and there are 100,000 people here. And I realize, you know, change is literally one person at a time. So if there's anyone watching this online, or watched that documentary, or maybe someone in this room who tonight has thought, I see this a little differently now, then that helps break that stereotypical theme that is within each of us to a degree. To just stand back and say, I'm not so sure. In our case in media, is to look at verbiage. And you made me think tonight, David, about it's so easy to use different terms. They become part of not everyday language, but they become part of language of stories about these issues. To just not, you don't have to use that phrase. People will know what you're talking about. It's a wonderful question, but it's never too late.
First of all, I want to say good evening to everyone. And my question is, it's not really a question. I want to touch upon a little bit on what Dr. Ernst was saying about nationalism or citizenship. It's not about Islam. Well, I know personally Muslims that are American from here. So it shouldn't be that way. I think we're being marginalized just because of the terminology used in the media. When we say Muslim American, I don't remember hearing Buddhist American or Jewish American or Christian American, for example. So this is just one thing I wanted to touch upon. And as far as the Muslims that are not originally from here, I just recently read a very interesting story that about a Jordanian that was coming into the country, and the customs looking at their, not the customs, who else looks at the passports? The immigration officer was asking this gentleman, where do you love the most, Jordan or America? And they were just passing, you know, time while they were, you know, checking their paperwork. And it was very interesting. His answer was that Jordan is like my mother, and America is like my wife. So I love that answer because you're going to love both of them, right? But, you know, the mother is where, you know, if you need kindness and love and you need a hug from your mother, you know, that is back home. But America here is you know, your new love. And you cannot let go of either one of them. So I just wanted to just shed a little bit of light on how Muslim Americans, if I'm using it now, how Muslims from abroad that were not born here in America think of America. So, so next time that you do see a Muslim, whether he's from abroad or not, you should embrace them and know that they want to be here and they love this country. Thank you.
Thank you.
The question I had is, our legal system in this country is based on principles of building legal precedent and new cases being based on that. And I've heard mentioned Sharia law, and I don't really understand, but I have the idea that that is a different system in a way, and is that cultural difference creating some of the friction, some of the issues in having us understand and relate more to each other?
Let me say one thing about this. I think that there's been a lot of disinformation on this topic that has been systematically pushed in a distorting manner. In fact, the view has been put forward that Muslims are all part of a deep conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States and impose something called Sharia law that will put all women into burqas. And that if any Muslim tells you something different, they're basically lying to you because they're part of this deep conspiracy. Now, if you believe this theory, I have a bridge in Brooklyn that I would like to sell you for a very low price. I mean, it is a paranoid fantasy. The thing is, and you know, others can comment on this, especially Abdullah, but Sharia basically is what tells Muslims how to pray, how to negotiate a marriage contract, how to do funeral rituals. And if that is outlawed, it's basically like outlawing Jewish ethical practices known as the halakha, and or the Roman Catholic Church's canon law. Now there is actually, this is private religious practice, and it doesn't have any conflict with American national law, but there have been legislative bills introduced into about 20 states scaring people to death that there's something called Sharia law that's going to overthrow the country, and it's extremely misleading. So I think this needs to be dismissed as a complete fantasy.
Okay.
I would love to talk a little bit more. It's in 2-3 minutes, explain the whole Sharia, the concept, but it's beautifully summarized in Dr. Ernst. But what bothers me the most as an American citizen who fell in love with the system here, who came to this country because of its secular democracy, who came to this country to intentionally raise my children in a society based on civic society, freedom of speech, liberties, and etc. When I see this fear of unicorn, an non-existent threat, that also disappoints me for how a lot of Americans, their distrust of what they have. Their distrust of American society, our constitutional society, basically believing that somehow some Muslims will come. And in this country for the last 200 years, people are trying to establish Christian Sharia. And they couldn't. What makes anybody think that these Muslims who are more than 50% college educated, more than 35% graduate degree, living in suburban homes, somehow are using this American way of living to force the society to ride camels and live in tents and etc. I mean, it's really mind-boggling. It sort of shakes my trust in American society, American people's ability to understand and appreciate what they have. Sharia basically means ethical, moral conduct and the framework of Muslims, the way we live our lives, the way we try to be an ethical, moral people in the teachings, in the light of the teachings of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. But not to say, like every propaganda, every lie, successful ones, they cannot be entirely flat-out lies, right? Every propaganda or every this kind of destructive message based on partial truth. There is a partial truth of a legal system, judicial system, which Muslims have been developing for the last 1400 years in order to manage their way of living, not only in their devotional and personal spiritual life, but also in their collective life in their governmental life, etc. But again, that legal system exists. But by all means, even that legal system is not a frozen rules and laws basically thrown from the sky to Muhammad's lap, peace be upon him, 1400 years ago. It's very dynamic. And many of them do not even apply to our American system. If you want to know which country is the most Sharia compliant, if you want to know which country is civic society, there's a study. If you look at the moral ethical teachings of Sharia and basically apply these moral ethical teachings to countries to see in which country Sharia lives the most thrivingly, are Scandinavian countries, Finland, Norway. In America, our judicial system, our economic system, our social justice system is a lot more Sharia compliant than many Muslim majority societies. That's where overwhelming majority of Muslims who are living in the United States came to this country, to be able to live their religion, practice religion much more freely. Yeah.
One more question.
Sure. I'm Brentwood Mitchell. I got my PhD at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I worked at Duke University, and currently I also want to represent tonight North Carolina Central University, which is the other great university that's not being represented tonight. My good friends Carl, and I call him my Turkish delight, have taught me much throughout the years. And I teach not only ethics, but I teach world religion at NCCU. My students taught me, by the way, that the institutions that are represented here tonight, they are the PWIs. They are the primarily white institutions, because I work at a historically black college university that represents, in large mass, the other. And what's been fun in teaching world religion at NCCU has been, we have been religious travelers. I have taken my students to the Hindu temple in Cary, Morrisville. Again, a first for many of my students who had never been to a Hindu temple before. We went to the Buddhist Retreat Center in Chapel Hill. Again, a first for many of my students. And my students not only include those who are Christian, but also those who are Muslim. And I remember the young woman who is Muslim in my class, when we entered into the Christian church, she looked at me and she said, "This is the first time I've ever been in a church. It is beautiful. Why do you keep hiding it from us?" And I think what I've learned in being myself the minority, one of the minority members at NCCU, is this issue, and maybe talk about this a little bit, that keeps on being played out in all societies, and that is fear of the other. Because that's truly what we keep on bumping up against, is fear of the other. And I think that my students who have represented and are their forebears who have been marginalized as African Americans in a largely white society have lessons to teach us all this evening as we keep on remembering the stories and hearing the stories of oppression that are going on throughout the society.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up now, and I wanted to thank everybody for coming. I'm sorry I didn't have the mic on. This has been a really great session, and I'm really, really happy that all of you have come and that this panel has come, and thank you very much, Dave Crabtree, for hosting this wonderful event. I'm sure we could go on for a long time, but we still, I think, have the parking until 9:30, so if you want to get up and talk amongst yourselves and talk to some of the panelists and grab some coffee or tea on your way out, feel free. Thanks again for coming.